She's in trouble. She's out. Holly looking to finish. Holly Holm is the new.
It takes years of training and combat experience before a fighter makes it to the UFC, let alone becomes a world champion in the promotion. In this video, we'll highlight the outliers who defied the odds to become UFC champions in a short time. Number 5, BJ Penn. Regardless of how his MMA career came to a close, BJ Penn is considered one of the greatest fighters in UFC history. Fought from featherweight to heavyweight? Check. Won belts in 2 weight divisions? Check. Put on some of the most exciting fights in the octagon? Check. But perhaps the most incredible thing about Penn's run was the fact that he actually made his MMA debut in the UFC. With just 3 years of professional MMA experience, Penn went on to beat Matt Hughes in his 9th career outing to become the UFC welterweight champ. He also gave French-Canadian legend Georges St. Pierre a run for his money when he dropped down to 155 pounds to rule that division. So lest we forget the prodigy as an absolute legend of the sport, no matter what his record says. Number 4, Holly Holm. Today, Holly Holm is considered to be one of the OGs in women's MMA. However, it will be remembered that her first UFC title shot came just 4 years after she started competing in the sport. Before she came over to the UFC, the preacher's daughter was a boxing world champion. But of course, having success in boxing doesn't necessarily translate into cage fighting, and vice versa. But with that in mind, it only makes Holm's monumental victory over Ronda Rousey much more impressive, as she beat the longtime champ in just her 3rd UFC bout. Her career hasn't been the same since, but Holly Holm was indeed a bit inexperienced when she picked up the world title in MMA. Number 3, Yuri Prohaska. Unfortunately, Yuri Prohaska never got the chance to defend the UFC light heavyweight title, all because of a severe shoulder injury that forced him to vacate the belt, as he's expected to miss over a year. But make no mistake, what Prohaska had accomplished is nothing short of spectacular. Prohaska started training in MMA after having watched the movie Never Back Down in 2008. 4 years later, he turned pro and rapidly rose into one of the most feared strikers in the sport. When 2020 rolled around, Prohaska was primed to make his UFC debut at the age of 27. With the absence of top contenders in the division, Yuri got his big break after just 2 fights in the UFC and picking up a win over a former title challenger. He went on to challenge the Brazilian champion Glover Teixeira in his 3rd fight in the octagon. After 20 minutes of non-stop violence, Yuri was able to submit Glover to capture the crown. Number 2, Brock Lesnar. It's not easy to become a UFC champ in a handful of matches, but this is where Brock Lesnar serves as an exception. It isn't like Lesnar is a natural savant like BJ Penn, but the man is just a freak of nature. Fresh off his back-to-back stints in the WWE and the NFL, Lesnar decided to take his brand of violence into the world of MMA. After winning his pro debut in K1 Heroes Dynamite USA, he went straight into the big leagues and got outwitted by a crafty Frank Mir. But he managed to bounce back with a win, which impressed UFC President Dana White as he saw enough promise in Lesnar. He believed in him so much that he offered him a title shot against the natural Randy Couture. And just like that, Lesnar flipped the script of his career and ran roughshod over the heavyweight division, beating Couture for the title in just his 3rd UFC outing. Number 1, Alex Pereira. MMA is a weird sport in that some fighters spend years and years only to never ever get close to contending for a championship, but for people like Alex Pereira, those mandates just don't apply. After spending most of his professional career as a world-class kickboxer, Pereira never fully got into MMA until he was 33 years old. Owing to his wins over former middleweight champion Israel Adesanya in kickboxing, Pereira was fast-tracked to a title shot after only 3 wins in UFC and just 6 pro fights on his resume. But when the opportunity came knocking, Pereira answered the door like a hungry lion by punching his ticket to the title shot and staging an epic showdown with his arch rival. And after arguably losing rounds 1-4 to Stylebender, Pereira found a way to stage one of the most epic comebacks the sport has ever seen. In his last few minutes of the fight, Portan said, "To hell with the scorecards," and knocked Adesanya out cold to become the new UFC middleweight champion of the world. And that about does it for today's video. Don't forget to follow Sportskeeda MMA on all our social media platforms.